Hey everyone, Dan Shields here, the church guitarist. It is good to see you again. Hey, I'm excited about the new channel that I have up and running, which is the Church Guitarist. It's basically the same as what I had before the Church Guitarist, but it's going to really focus on people who are playing in church primarily. So we're going to be talking about worship and music theory that works for church and sounds and techniques that work for church. And of course, a bunch of the tutorials and things like that as well. So today, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the idea of stage presence and what we're to look like on stage. You know, and it's a confusing thing. It seems like a fairly easy and fairly straightforward thing, but it's not always. Sometimes it can be a pretty tricky thing to work your way through as far as like thinking about what it is to be on stage and to worship. You know, in a certain way, you might think like, well, there's nothing to it. You just get up on stage and you play, right? You focus on the music, you focus on worshiping. But I think there's a little bit more to that. And as we unfold some of the things, some of the tips that I'm going to give you, I think it may help you to have better presence on stage, a better personality on stage that really helps to draw people into worship and not have people be either put off by what they see on stage or overly drawn to what's on stage as well. You know, one of the guys I work with is a guy named Chris Jamison, and he was a guy who was a voice finalist a couple years back, wonderful vocalist. But when he first started off in music, he was not a Christian. So when he got up onto stage, everything on stage was about being engaging and about, you know, really capturing an audience and having everybody look at you and you be the center point, and for them also to have a good time and have a good experience. But it was really about Chris Jamison, the artist. And he said one of the most difficult things to wrap his head around was when we're on stage worshiping, it's ultimately about worship. It's never about us on stage. And actually, the more invisible we are, the better it is. We want people to see the Lord and experience Him, not look at us and experience us. But obviously, we're the worship leaders on stage. We're the ones that are leading in worship. And so we're really helping to engage people. And part of what we're doing when we're on stage is we're showing people what it looks like to be worshipers. And, I would say the first thing that's the most important thing, and this, if you hear nothing else, hear this. The most important thing as you lead worship is to lead worship. You've got to be a lead worshiper. You've got to be the one that's leading the charge into worship, not into a performance, not into how we look, but into real, genuine worship. You know, I remember watching a documentary on the guys who were storming the beaches at Normandy, and when they were training the officers, they said the most important thing for an officer to do is not to be a logistics guy or not to be a tactician or not even to be the fiercest fighter. But the most important thing for them to do was to lead the way and to lead the charge. And so when they got pinned down on the beaches at Normandy and they were all hunkered down, it was the officers who first stood up and led the charge, and the men followed them. And there was also high casualty rates among them, so they had to be some of the bravest out there, but they were leading the charge. That's what leadership was. Well, we as leaders, there's a bunch of different things that we do as leaders, but I would say the first and foremost thing that we need to be able to do, at least sometimes during our worship set, is to actually worship and engage in worship. But what I wanted to talk about today was how we lead in a way that physically manifests what it should look like for people who are worshiping. You know, because a lot of people come through the doors of this church. Some, they know and they can raise their hands and they understand what it is to engage and they really deeply engage. But some people who have come from traditional church backgrounds or non-church backgrounds, and they think it's kind of weird. It's funny, you know, they might go to a concert of their favorite band and they're like, you know, raising their hand, or of course, you know, they go to a football game and their hands are up in the air when we score a touchdown or whatever. But when it comes to church, they don't quite know what to do. So part of what we're doing is training them what it looks like to worship and how we should be in worship. But I think there's a couple of really easy tips that'll help you. I'm going to start off with some negative ones first, and then I'm going to go into some positives that should help us as worship leaders physically on stage. And so if you're somebody who's, you know, an instrumentalist, say for instance, and you're just caught in your instrument, or, you know, you're self-conscious because you don't want everybody looking at you and you feel like uncomfortable. I feel that way. I'm a very introverted person, so when I'm up on stage, I don't like people looking at me much, and it's easy for me to crawl into my shell and not help people to really engage in worship. It's almost like in conversation, there's an open posture that you have in conversation that helps people to be drawn into you. Or if you're a speaker on stage, they always give you tips like show your armpits, so when you're speaking to people, make sure that you're looking, making eye contact, showing your... So there are certain things that we do as people on stage to engage those in the audience. And our ultimate goal is not to lead them to us, but to lead them to the Lord. But let me give you a couple of different acrostics here. I think that's the right word for it, where there's going to be letters that spell out something that hopefully is going to help us to engage worship better, which is what we're all about. All right, the first thing that I'm going to say is you don't want to be a dead person on stage. We never want to be dead, and this acrostic might help you to remember this, the D, E, A, and D. So dead, the first thing is you're disengaged, and what I mean is you're emotionally disengaged from the audience. You're sort of in your own world. You've crawled into your own little thing, and you might be worshiping and closing your eyes or looking up, but you're never engaging with the audience. That's a problem. You want to be engaged with the audience. The second thing is if you're emotionless. So, I'll see a lot of people on stage and they're really focusing. They want to be able to do well. So they're thinking about their parts, or they're thinking about, what they're supposed to be playing or things like that. But what happens is their face, instead of being a face of engagement, their face completely goes dead and they just look. And no matter how beautiful what you're playing is, if you don't see any emotion on your face, you're not going to connect with that person. The third thing is I'd say that they're apathetic, that they don't really care about engaging. They have a level of apathy with people. They just are doing their thing, and whatever their thing is, and they say it's all about my worship and me being in worship. And there's a certain degree of truth to that. We often say we're an audience, we play for an audience of one, and that should be true. But ultimately, our job is on stage to lead others in worship. So we want to do things that really brings them into worship, and we need to care about that. We need to actively care about the people that we're leading and them having an experience with God, not just us. So you don't want to be apathetic. And then the last thing is distant, and these all sort of say the same thing, but we don't want to feel like we're distant from people, like we're keeping them at arm's length. We emotionally are not connecting with them. What we want to say is, it's us together who are worshiping, not I'm worshiping or not I'm performing for you, but we are all engaged in worship together. So dead, disengaged, emotionless, apathetic, and distant. Those are the things that you don't want. All right, now what are the things that you do want? Well, I'm going to use another acrostic here, and the acrostic is SMILE, S-M-I-L-E. And the first thing that it says is smile. That's a really good thing on stage. So that's not one of the 5 letters, but just to say it, if you're smiling at people, that really helps them to engage. If you're walking down the road and somebody smiles at you and nods their head, most of the time you're going to smile and nod your head back. You're going to engage with them somehow. If you show your teeth somehow, and even like you'll see great players, Carlos Santana, he might not smile all the time as a guitar player. If you know him, he's an older guitar player. But, he's got this he's playing and he's into it. He's showing his teeth. That's an important thing. So smile or at least show your teeth. But let me walk through the S, M, I, L, and E to help you to remember some things that are important things to do every time you're on stage. Maybe not all the time, but every time at least one of these 5 things is happening at all times. The first thing is sing along if you can. The words to these songs are powerful. People out in the congregation are singing, and we're to be leading them in singing. Now, sometimes you're a front stage singer, and that's very natural for you. But I will say, I've seen stage singers who maybe they just sing harmony parts, and they just sort of like, hold the mic down, and they don't do anything at all until it comes to the chorus, and they're singing, and then they start to sing. Sing the entire time if you can, which means, you need to know the words. So if you're a vocalist, you should be singing 100% of the time, even if you're off mic. If you're an instrumentalist, now sometimes you can't play or you can't, play and sing at the same time because rhythmically it's very challenging or something. But I would encourage you as much as you can, sing and engage, so sing out loud, sing with your, open your hands if there's a breakdown section, or if you can, sing along with it. It shows people that you're worshiping. So number 1 in the SMILE acrostic is sing. Number 2 is move. there's nothing worse than when you see somebody on stage and they just stay in one place, and they're, especially if they're staring at their music and they're just in one place, or they're staring at their instrument, the guitar neck or something. It's super important to move. So you want to be able to move as you're doing this. That's a really important thing. Sway your body, move your legs, move from your spot, actually move your feet and walk your spot. Now, sometimes lighting people say you need to be in a certain spot. Well, stay in that area, but don't just stay foot planted. Move along the stage a little bit, and that'll really help people to feel like they're loose and they can move too. You don't want people to be stiff and, you want them to move and engage with the music. We're designed to do that by our Creator, and it's important that we move. The third thing is, so S is sing along, M is move, I is interact. And you want to interact in two ways, and maybe even three. First of all, you want to interact with the congregation. So you want to be able to engage with them and really try to connect with them, and think consciously about connecting with the audience. One of the worst things you can do is just look off into space or shut your eyes, So engage with them somehow, interact with them, and interact with the other people who are on the stage. If the drummer's doing something, look at the drummer. If you're a singer, it's fine to look at the other singers. Don't just be a silo by yourself, but interact. And of course, you can interact with the Lord too. You can engage with Him in a real way. All right. So S, sing along. M, move. I, interact with people. L, look at the audience. I said this a couple times in the SMI. It's really important to make eye contact. If I'm doing this video and the whole time I'm like this, and I'm talking about all of these things and telling you what you should do, but I never look at, it would be very odd. But when you look somebody in the eye, you're looking at specific people. And I will give you a tip on this. Sometimes I have a tendency as a guitar player, I can crawl into my own world and not look, and I'm also, you've got to do things technically. So you have to look sometimes at your instrument or your pedals or whatever it is. If you're a vocalist, sometimes you need to look at the prompter. But in general, you want to be looking at an audience member, or you can look up to the Lord too sometimes. But one thing I used to do, because I was so shy, it was hard for me to look at the audience, the congregation, even though they're my body, they're my people, But I would look sometimes at the lights in the back of the room, and that would sort of help to make it look as if I was looking at people in the audience. And sometimes I have a tendency to look at the person who's totally disengaged, and that sort of bums you out as a worship leader. But look to some of the people who are engaging and really in worship. Whether they lift their hands or not, you can tell the people out there who are passionate about it. All right, and the last thing I would say is this: emote. So sing, move, interact, look, and emote. You don't want to be emotionless and dead. Again, if I'm talking to you and I'm talking to you like this, and I'm saying you really need to be passionate on stage, if that's what you look like, even as an instrumentalist, it's going to feel very flat and very disengaged, like we said on that dead acrostic, because you're not showing any emotion. Jonathan Edwards, he wrote a book. It was called Religious Affections. A little hard to read because it was, of when it was written in the 1700s. But if you can read it, it's a really, really worthwhile book. It's a really excellent book. But one of the things that it's talking about is that we should feel deep emotion. We should be affected by our relationship with our Heavenly Father and Christ. Christ died for us on a cross. He lived a perfect life. He, the one who was in heaven from the beginning and created all things, came here to be with us. Man, if you don't have any emotion to that, you have to question, where are you in your faith really? So when you're on stage, when you're showing people how to really engage, one of the things you want to do is emote, because that's hard for them to do oftentimes. They don't know what it means to emote in worship. So, shutting your eyes and, showing an emotion on your face, or smiling and interacting, or feeling that intensity of what some of these words say. The words are very heavy. And that's why I say sing, that's the first thing. Some of the words are really powerful for these songs. So if you're just in your world on your instrument, or but you're not really engaging with those words and letting them hit you in a way that you have an emotional response, you're probably not going deep enough in worship. So anyhow, that's the 5 things that I think will really help. If you sing along with the music as much as you can, do that. If you move on stage, if you interact with people on stage and the congregation, if you look out to the congregation, and if you show emotions, those things will all help us to really be better worship leaders, more than just the craft of singing the right parts or playing the right notes in the right time, but really helping to lead people into the presence of our living God. That's what it's all about ultimately, and hopefully we'll be better and better at our craft as we do that. So until next time, hopefully that was helpful for you. God bless. And you may have some other ideas of things that really helped you on stage, or that you see people doing on stage that make you disengage with them or engage with them. Put those in the comments below. That would really help some other worship leaders who are really trying to share with their teams, or team members who are really trying to grow in being worship leaders. So until next time, God bless.